Hello. Today I will be talking about two case studies that I got and found interesting to me. So the first one I'm talking about is about tweets and Twitter. And for this case study, the people running it only got 24,824 tweets about behavioral economics, and that was all that was on Twitter in 2019 about behavioral economics. Funny though that the average number of tweets a day is 300,000. So in the spectrum, that's not that many tweets about So, they asked some questions, and some of those questions, the four questions were: what topics of interest about behavioral economics were discussed on Twitter during 2019? And the top three most discussed things were artificial intelligence, big data, and financial technology. And the second question was, how did these topics evolve throughout the year? And it said that they evolved and became more about insurance, technology, and research. The most influential accounts in the behavioral economic field were Phil Yates, N. Taleb, Sheil Kapadia, Andy Stobe, and Casey Basu. And what topics could be unexplored and become a trend? They didn't really have much about that, so I couldn't find the answer to that one. Interestingly enough, the most liked and retweeted tweets about behavioral economics were about football. So that probably says something about America, because only tweets that were in English were used. So it probably says something about people like their football. But overall, this case study touched on the choice people have to like and retweet tweets, and also touches on incentives in behavioral economics. Incentives are like the reason someone will do something. And the reason people were posting these tweets, I think, is they had a social incentive to show that they're smart. They wanted to let people know that they're smart, so that was their social incentive. And I think that the people that were retweeting and liking those tweets also had a social incentive to want to fit in and maybe show that they knew what the tweets meant, even though maybe they didn't actually know. They just wanted to seem like they know, because they wanted people to think they're smart, which is what their social incentive was. And then the other case study is about private ownership, shared single ownership, and joint ownership. And basically, private ownership is where someone owns an item, like, say, a computer, and they're the only ones who ever play on that computer, who ever touch it. Yeah. And then shared single ownership is where someone buys something, like a computer, and they use it, but also other people get to use it as well. So they own it, but they let other people use it. And then joint ownership is when a bunch of people, say like 3 or 4 people, all chip in a little money, and all of them buy a computer. And so they all get to play on that computer because they all own it. And yeah. So that's what this case study is about. And just overall, the private ownership people were less likely to replace items because they couldn't just replace something that meant so much to them. And shared and joint ownership were tied. They were equally likely to replace something because they didn't see that much value in it, whereas the private ownership person did see value in it, or more value than the other two. And the private ownership people, they asked for more money to when they asked West to sell, they asked for more money, whereas the shared single and shared single and the joint ownership people asked for less money, because since they were not the only ones who used it, they didn't get that much use out of it, so they sold it for cheaper. Whereas the private ownership, they were the only ones using it primarily, so it's more expensive to them because, yeah, they're the only ones who used it, and they don't really want to sell it, which is why they ask for a higher price, because they don't really want to sell it, even though someone might make them or want them to sell it. And private ownerships did not want to throw away an item because they thought that it was too important to them. They couldn't live without it, so they couldn't throw it away. And that's probably how people become hoarders. And then shared and joint ownerships, they were likely to throw stuff away because, again, they didn't see much value in it. And also because of perceived contamination is why they would throw stuff away, because since they saw it as contaminated, like other people touching it and using it, they thought it was too contaminated and maybe had too much germs on it, so they wanted to throw it away and get it out because it was too contaminated. Now this has some interesting stuff. This shows the paradox of value, I think, which is paradox of value is where something like water, you see it everywhere, but it's not like water is like an essential need, but since it's everywhere, you don't really need it that much. Like you need water, but because it's everywhere, it's not that much. Whereas diamonds, those are rare. You don't find them. They are not everywhere, so they're worth more, even though it's not an essential. Like water, it's worth more because it's rarer than water is. And so I think this shows it because to the private ownership, this motorcycle, which is rare to them, like this motorbike, this private ownership owns, that they think it is rarer, and so it's more special to them because it's got value. And the other two, as like it's the same make, model, color, motorbike, but because the private ownership was the only one who used it, and they were the only ones who used it, they got more value out of it, so they think it's worth more, as the other two think it's worth less because they were not the only ones who used it. So it got used up faster because the other people were using it, and it wasn't just them. And this just shows the paradox of value, because the private ownership thinks it's rarer, even though it's not, which makes them make it higher, market at a higher value than the other two would, which just shows that. And now, I think this also shows the predictable irrationality of people, because this private ownership, their choice to make it higher is irrational. Like to price it higher to sell it is irrational, because if you're selling it, you probably want to get rid of it. So why would you market higher if you're selling it? It's probably because, again, the irrationality is like, I want to sell it, but I'm going to make it higher because I don't really want to sell it. And so that's that. And then there's also something I want to touch on, the Homoeconomicus, which is like basically the normal person, and I think this shows that really well. Like the normal person, private owner, does not want to sell or throw away or dispose of something that they use a lot and used a lot, and even though it might be broken, they don't necessarily want to throw it away. I think this shows Homo economicus, because like the normal average person doesn't really want to throw stuff away, because if they use it a lot, they have value and see value in it, so they don't really want to throw it away. Whereas maybe like other people who are not the Homo economicus private owners would throw it away just because it's done, they aren't going to use it anymore. And I think this just all ties back to behavioral economics, because again, like there's some psychology behind all of these people's choices they make to market higher or market cheaper because they got to use it more. They didn't get to use it more. And I just think this second study really like brings home the case of like the psychology behind economics and money. And so thank you for listening to my podcast. Goodbye.